I was driving my old 2001 Mustang from Texas to Arizona to visit my brothers. The car wasn't the most reliable, but I'd stocked the trunk with emergency supplies, water, tools, the basics. I was cruising down a lonely desert road, one lane each way, surrounded by miles of empty sand, cacti, and the occasional shrub. With the top down and the speedometer nudging 90, I was loving the solitude and the speed. But then, the car started making these strange popping sounds, and it jolted slightly. My heart sank. I braked hard, bringing the car from full speed to a stop, and got out, lifting the hood as if I actually knew what I was doing. There was no smoke, nothing obviously wrong, but I had no idea what was causing the problem. I climbed back in, praying the engine would start again, but I wasn't holding my breath. This car had a history of issues after all. Naturally, I tried calling roadside assistance, only to find I had no cell signal this far out in the desert. So I waited on the side of the road, sitting on the trunk and sweating it out in the relentless sun, hoping someone would eventually drive by. Hours went by, and finally, I saw a glint of sunlight on a car in the distance. I jumped up, waving my arms, but the car sped past without even slowing down. I couldn't believe it. Who leaves someone stranded like that? As night fell, I grew hungrier and more anxious. I hadn't seen another car since that first one, so I was trying to stave off the hunger with water from the trunk. Eventually, headlights appeared. I waved my arms again, and this time, the truck actually stopped. A large man stepped out. I told him my car had broken down and asked if he knew anything about engines. But instead of looking at my car, he asked questions that set me on edge. Was I alone? Had I called for help? Did anyone know where I was? Finally, he offered me a ride. I climbed into his truck, still on edge, as he warned it would be a while before we'd hit a spot with cell service. Not far down the road, he muttered a curse and pulled over, saying, "The damn thing broke down." I stared at him, my nerves spiking. He held my gaze a little too long before asking me to step out and pop the hood. The whole thing felt off. I got out, keeping some distance between myself and the truck. When I heard the engine rev, I realized too late what was happening. He was trying to run me over. I threw myself to the side, barely avoiding his truck. Heart pounding, I took off running into the darkness. Behind me, I heard gunshots, close enough to make me think he was aiming at me. I sprinted until I couldn't hear him anymore, then hit the ground and lay still, trying to disappear into the desert night. Eventually, his truck sped off, and the silence returned. I spent the night in the sand and dirt, only falling asleep out of sheer exhaustion. At dawn, I was finally able to flag down another pickup. The couple inside took one look at my dirt-covered, shaken self and offered me water and a ride to the nearest town. They helped me contact a towing company, and it took nearly an hour to get back to my car, then the same distance again to the nearest shop. That drive ended up being one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Getting stranded is one thing, but being nearly run down and shot at is something I'll never forget. Near my parents' house, there was a small stretch of woods where I often wandered alone. Tucked within the trees, I discovered a circular clearing with a gentle stream winding nearby and a large rock at the center. It became my personal retreat, the place I'd go to sit, read, and lose myself in a book. You could say I was a bit of a loner. One afternoon, as usual, I headed to my clearing, sat on the rock, opened my book, and continued reading. It was late in the day, so the light was beginning to fade, casting shadows across the trees. My reading was interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind me. Curious, I set my book down and carefully stepped into the trees, hoping it was a deer or some other animal. Growing up, I'd always been afraid of black bears. I heard the footsteps again and followed them quietly. Whatever was making them was moving fast, faster than I could go while trying to stay silent. Soon, the sounds disappeared altogether. Figuring the creature had run off, I shrugged it off and made my way back toward the clearing. But as soon as I got a view of the clearing, my stomach twisted with fear. Someone was sitting on my rock, their back to me, holding my book. For a moment, I froze, unsure whether to approach or back away. "I don't like this book," the man said suddenly, as if he knew exactly where I was hiding in the shadows. He turned to face me, wearing a strange, unsettling smile. "I want you to come here often." I was just 13, and my only instinct was to run. The man took a step toward me, but I was already dashing back through the trees, heart pounding, heading straight for home. Within minutes, I burst through the door, breathless and shaken. That night, I was jolted awake by a soft knock on my window. Panic surged through me, and I screamed for my dad. He rushed into the room, and after I told him what happened, he went outside to check. When he came back, my blood went cold. He was holding the very book I'd left behind in the woods, saying it had been placed right outside my window. For the next week, I slept in my parents' room, and I never went back to that clearing again. Tennessee is full of characters, especially out in the wild. I hiked all around the state while in school, making memories with a girl in the deep, quiet woods. The roads to popular hiking spots are solid, with countless trails branching off if you know where to look for them. The best trails tend to be a bit hidden, and they're usually a ways out. There's one waterfall out there, a spring-fed cascade that flows over a mossy granite wall into a shallow pond. I went there last time with a friend, Ashley, and somehow we got separated. We're both experienced hikers, more than 10 years each. But still, I can't figure out how we lost each other. I've thought about it 1,000 times, and I'm convinced it happened on this particular ledge system. To reach the top of the falls, you have to take a detour through a 3-way split in the trail, where a rickety wooden railing lines a set of rocky, corridor-like paths. I've taken all 3 paths before, and they each lead to the same place, usually within 3 or 4 minutes. But I avoid the left path now. There are these strange, dark stains in the middle of it that look suspiciously like blood. The odd thing is, the left path is the most inviting. Flowers grow out of vines that twist through moss-covered rocks. It's hard to avoid that route, but I'd rather not find out what caused those stains. Anyway, that day I was about 45 seconds ahead of Ashley. I took the right path, but remembered I hadn't warned her to avoid the left. I knew turning back would be tricky, thanks to the angle and a few small drop-offs, so I figured I'd speed through and shout to her from where the paths rejoin. When I reached the point where the middle path drops off, I called out to her, but there was no reply. It hit me that she must have taken the left path. I sprinted back, climbing into the left corridor, hoping she hadn't seen the stains and freaked out. I ran the path, calling her name, but she wasn't there. That's when I noticed the dead silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, just me and the trickle of water nearby. My skin prickled. I searched along the whole left path, even checking the small side passages, but found nothing. I decided to make my way to the top of the falls, hoping to get a better view. When I reached the summit, there she was, just sitting, waiting for me. She told me she'd taken the left path with a trail guide. That didn't sit right. There aren't any trail guides out there. Rangers, sure, but they don't wear uniforms in that rock maze. She described a man in a uniform with a trail authority visor, and when she saw the look on my face, she nodded, and without saying a word, we knew we had to get out of there fast. It's that feeling when you know someone's watching you. We made a show of going back to the car for more water, leaving behind some fish food in a crevice, a habit of mine, before we started back. Ashley showed me this narrow side tunnel I hadn't noticed before, barely big enough to crouch through. We walked through in silence, both of us feeling like we should have taken a different route. "I think he lives in those tunnels," she said quietly. Ashley told me how he had kept trying to lead her deeper, but she'd followed the light and eventually saw him standing there, watching her as she walked away to the top. That meant he'd been in those tunnels the whole time I was searching for her, and that she'd followed him before noticing the bloodstains on the walls and floor. But the part that truly unsettled me? When we finally got back to the car, I found the fish food I'd left in the crevice sitting on the hood of my car. Ashley's water bottle, which had been clipped to her pack, was gone too. He must have taken it while we were hiking. We're fast hikers. I have no idea how he managed to get close enough to grab it. We never went back to that spot, and we never will.